And first, we're going to go over a couple ground rules and some tech updates on how to use Zoom. As soon as I get this, okay, hopefully you guys can still see the screen now. Oh, here's just a few photos of some lovely farmers markets from around the state. The whole reason we're doing this is to keep folks in business, to keep folks fed, and to keep folks safe. So here for our technology overview, you guys are all being muted as you come in the room. You have the ability to unmute yourself, but please save that for times when we're having group conversations. If you have any specific questions, you can type them into our chat box, and our lovely AFMA intern, Megan, will be monitoring those, and she'll be saving that whole chat, and she'll also be letting the speakers know when there are questions throughout the presentation. At the end of each of our presentation, though, there will be plenty of time to get your questions and answers together. So one other thing we'd like for you to do is to set your Zoom name to your name and your location so we can tell where you guys are from. So the other thing we wanted to do real quick is just to kind of get a gauge of the room and to see what people were attending for. If they were a farmer's market manager, a vendor, there's a lot of options. So I'm going to launch the poll now, and you should be able to select what is your primary role in attending this workshop. So you can see folks are clicking away. We'll give it a few more seconds to pick.
Robbie, could you go over how to change your name to indicate your location?
Sure. Megan, or if you're on the phone, do you want to explain that?
Sure, yeah. I did type it into the chat, but if you hover over the picture of you or your name, if your video is turned off, you'll see 3 little dots in the top right corner. If you click that, it should give you the option to rename, or if you go to the participant list and find yourself, you should see more, and it'll give you the option there as well. So you can get to it from 2 different places.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And so we have our poll in. We have the majority of folks, by 34%, are farmers. We have farmers market organizers, cottage food producers, government folks. So we have a whole gamut of people, and hopefully you guys can see the results now, that poll. Okay, so let's see. Next up, I just wanted to, if Rachel Miller, are you on the phone?
Yes, I am. I had to take you out of my pocket. Sorry.
Hey, Rachel is the president of the Alaska Food Policy Council, and I'm going to just give her a moment as one of our co-sponsors to introduce the organization and what we do.
Sure. Welcome to my kitchen. Good morning. Thanks, Robbie, for putting this together. I think that the last Farmers Market Association conference that we had a couple weeks ago really showed, with over 260 registrants, that people here are really excited about local food, and that we know that farmers markets are critical to food access and market access for farmers. So in my position as the co-chair at the Alaska Food Policy Council, in collaboration with, we're a 15-member working board. Really, we connect, inform, and advocate across the state around food systems. And so our role, we often see, is just connecting people. No need to reinvent the wheel if awesome resources already exist, like the Farmers Market Association. And so some of the things that we've done and brainstormed around how we can be helpful and of service in this time, kind of like what we're doing right now, using a Zoom platform. We are happy to help facilitate meetings virtually, in person, if that ever happens again, for groups to get together and have some really intentional dialogue. So that's something that we wanted to reach out to the community and say that we can offer. A couple things that we've already done in relation to COVID-19, we've written a letter to Senator Murkowski, we've written a letter to Agriculture Secretary Perdue, lining out some of the challenges that we know face our farmers and our producers and our eaters, our consumers in Alaska, and some ways to reduce those barriers. Looking at everything from funding, agricultural funding, and funding of infrastructure to increasing access at the consumer level through food assistance programs and ways to better access food. So those are a couple things we've already done. We have just pulled on 3 new board members, and so we have some working capacity now. We have a fresh committee on food waste. And so we are trying to figure out where the state of Alaska, where we all really want to focus our efforts. And if you're excited about starting a working group or you want to have more of a focused conversation, come on over and you too can start a committee. So we really try to cover all things food, and we're trying to get a broader representation across the state and not be Anchorage or Fairbanks centric. And so we're excited to expand a little bit more this year. And we will probably talk more about that at our conference coming up in November. But yeah, just wanted to be on here and offer up ourselves as a resource. If you have ideas for projects, let us know. We're always happy to talk. And Robbie, wearing all of her hats, is our recently hired executive director here. So she can also answer questions about AFPC. But that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for the time, Robbie. And that's all I got.
All right, thank you, Rachel. And yeah, Alaska Food Policy, it's akfoodpolicy.org if you want to find out more information. And we also have a pretty robust COVID-19 resource list. So thanks for being here, Rachel. I did want to move on to Kimberly. Are you in the room?
I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to pass it off to you, Kimberly.
Okay, thank you so much, Robbie. First, thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk with you today. Christina Carpenter, who is the Director of Environmental Health, she's my boss. We work in the Alaska Food Safety and Sanitation Program within the Division of Environmental Health at DEC. She sends her regrets. She had a conflicting meeting and she wasn't able to come give you a welcome, but she really appreciates everyone who's put this together. I want to start out by giving a big thank you to Robbie and Lorinda up in our Fairbanks office. You two have been just amazing in pulling the information together and working with us so closely to get out some sound guidance for folks. And Brad St. Pierre up in Fairbanks, thank you as well. We really appreciate all of your input. Sarah Lewis at Cooperative Extension, and Dina Kalaji with the State Veterinarian's Office at DEC in the Division of Environmental Health. I really appreciate all of the work that you've been doing. I've been with the Department of Environmental Conservation in the food safety program for almost 20 years. And our work with farmers markets in this state, particularly with the Tanana Valley Farmers Market, precedes me. We have a very long history of working collaboratively so that the vendors who are operating within the farmers market are operating safely, so that people are not only have access to wonderful food that's nutritious, but it's also safe. I think that the declaration from the government that farmers markets are essential to the infrastructure of the country. You knew that before they made an actual declaration. You're more than critical. I think that farmers markets play a lot of different roles, and it's not just the role of tackling food insecurity. You're promoting small businesses, you're tackling social issues, you're supporting female-led businesses, owned businesses. There's so much that you do in your communities that just cannot be overstated. For this meeting today, I know they're going to go over exactly what we'll go over throughout the course of the meeting. But I want you to know that the purpose of the meeting is really to tell you what the best practices are so that you can help your vendors and you can facilitate your vendors putting out the safest food products possible, and also just generally protecting both the vendors and the customers, particularly during this difficult time with COVID-19. Of course, you know the food safety concerns never go away. And when you have good food safety practices, that really helps to support containing the spread of COVID-19 as well. We were although there are definitely some big negatives to COVID-19, undeniably, one of the silver linings is that the message of washing your hands has really become viral, and we are just so happy about that. We've been preaching it for years, and finally people are really taking hold of it and seeing the importance of hand washing. It's the #1 thing that you can do to prevent foodborne illness and to stay well. I do want you to know or recognize, again, that the situation is evolving every single day. We are in touch with the Unified Command for the state of Alaska. They're helping to manage this emergency and share information and facilitate information flow. And I'll tell you, every single day, there is something that is changing that we're reacting to and that we are trying to help provide information to all of you and anyone who has questions about how this information relates to food safety. Please be patient as the information is changing. As we learn more about transmission, as we learn more about just the nature of the virus in particular, and as the situation is changing with businesses reopening and trying to phase in, trying to get back to normal, things are just going to change, and we appreciate your flexibility and rolling with it as we go through those changes together. And last, I just wanted to say that recently there was a new health mandate that the governor put out regarding restaurant reopenings, and they mentioned something called a mitigation plan. And there's not a lot of detail in particular about what that mitigation plans should look like. I think it's very much up to the individual operators. It might be something that you might want to consider. It's certainly not required of farmers markets, but it might help in allaying people's concerns and just being really clear with all the vendors on exactly what the expectations are and how you'll handle certain situations. Again, most everything that we'll present, especially those things that are specific to COVID-19, are best practices. It's guidance. I think the governor has said numerous times in his press conferences that we're not looking to have a heavy hand with Alaskans. We are really counting on a lot of personal accountability and personal responsibility. And I think of any of the audiences that we work with, this group is particularly in tune with caring about others and really working to better the community. And so I think that couldn't be more true than it is in this community here. I don't want to take a lot of time. I know you have a lot of material that you want to go through, and I really appreciate each of you taking your time today to attend. It's really exciting to see how committed all of you are to food safety generally, and also to protecting your friends and your neighbors and your family during this difficult time. Again, thank you so much to the people who organized and pulled this meeting together. And we look forward to many more years of working collaboratively with all of the farmers markets throughout the state of Alaska. If you ever have any questions about food safety, we have we try to keep our website as up to date as we can. Unfortunately, due to budget reductions, we don't have a full-time web person. However, Lorinda does the best job she possibly can to keep all of those pages up to date and kind of keep us all reined in. So Robbie, I'll turn it back to you. Again, thank you so much for the work that you've been doing, and thank you to each of you who are on the line today.
Thank you, Kimberly. And again, thank you for all the work that you guys have done too in helping us get these guidelines or these recommendations together. So now, oops, done. Lorinda, are you on the phone? I'm sure you are.
I'm here.
I am pulling up our, did you want to review the objectives of the workshop?
Sure. So we've got until noon or a little bit longer if we need it, or shorter if we're retired. And so what we want to do is just go, the objectives are just making sure that we just want to be clear about markets being safe. You know, we want to make sure that you have the guidance that you need to make sure that, first of all, vendors feel safe, that market staff feel safe, and also that your customers feel safe and confident at shopping at the market. Our second section, we're just going to give a basic overview of food safety at the market, so things you've probably heard in the past, or maybe things that are new to you about just general overview of food safety. But just know that now it's real important to pay attention to food safety, because enhanced food safety practices are very important, not only for COVID-19, but also we don't want anybody to get sick from a foodborne illness at this point in time when our medical system is so overwhelmed. And then we're going to go over the COVID-19 guidance and best practices, and talk a little bit about guidance versus regulations. And then Robbie at the end is going to wrap it up, Robbie and Brad, just sharing a lot of the guidance that that they have pulled together and seen with other states and counties and jurisdictions across the country. How's that sound, Robbie?
Sounds good.
And I forgot to tell you that I'm Lorinda, and I'm one of the section managers with the Food Safety and Sanitation Program here in Fairbanks.
And I think I didn't introduce myself either, and I'll do that real quick. I'm Robbie Mixon. I've been managing the Homer Farmers Market. This will be my 10th season. And a few years ago, we reinvigorated the Alaska Farmers Market Association, and we reinvigorated through a USDA Farmers Market Promotion Grant that is hosted at Cook Inlet Keeper here in Homer. And I could not have done any of this without the help from the market managers around the state, and specifically Brad St. Pierre, who runs the Tananall Valley Farmers Market. Brad, are you here?
I can unmute myself. There we go. Hey, everybody. I'm Brad. I'm the Tananall Valley Farmers Market Manager, and I'm also the Vice President at the Alaska Farmers Market Association. And today we're going to start off going over a quick review of cottage food rules, and then produce safety, on-farm produce safety. And Sarah Lewis is going to be running us through a cottage food refresher of all the rules that haven't changed because of COVID, but that are still in place. And then Dina Kalorji is going to go through on-farm food safety practices for farmers, and just give us a refresher before we get into the COVID-19 stuff. So I think, Sarah, are you here? You want to?
I am,
Right.
and I'm unmuted even. There's all these steps to go through to remember. So I will go ahead and share my screen in a second. First, I want to thank Lorinda and Robbie and Brad for inviting me to present on this today. This is something that some of you may have either maybe in person seen me present or online. I am with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Cooperative Extension Service. My program areas are health, home, food, and community development. So some years ago, I working with Lorinda and other folks in Extension, we put together presentations on how to guide people through the cottage foods regulations that were new a while back. They're no longer new. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thanks, Brad. Okay. All right. So you'll see them called Alaska home-based food businesses as well as cottage food. So I wanted to put that there. And what this really is, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times farmers adding value to their crops, or potentially wanting to diversify what you sell, which could be really beneficial this year and possibly next year in terms of diversifying what you have available at the market. And The thing that is slightly different now, I guess, is that whereas before, people, of course, could either cook at home, and I'll talk about that in a minute, or perhaps you could go to a licensed kitchen. Now, pretty much everybody has to do it at home. So I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the things that we want to consider when you are doing your cottage foods at home. All right, so as I said, this is something that was created by DEC in response to lots of community requests. I'm going to look at the time, okay, just to make sure that I don't go over time, give Dean enough time. So they were adopted into the food code in 2012 to allow the sale of non-potentially hazardous foods. I'll talk about what those are directly to the consumer without a permit. So the exemption that we talk about is being exempt from the standard food business permit. But certain conditions have to be met for you to qualify for the exemption. So, and there's several different categories that you need to pay attention to. Detailed knowledge. You have to keep and be able to provide. You don't have to have it at your booth, but you need to be able to provide detailed knowledge about the food, how it was processed, the ingredients, allergens, what the packaging, etc. And any person who is selling the product must also have all of this knowledge and be able to provide it to consumers or answer questions about the product on the spot. So those are, that's the detailed knowledge. And also in that knowledge of the rest of the food product, you have to have the recipe or the formulation available, not just knowledge of what the ingredients maybe are, but how you processed it, what type of kitchen you did it in, etc., in case there's ever a concern about the safety of the product. If someone does get a product that they have some concern or another with, and they need to maybe track what's going on, where the problem happened, the DEC may contact you, and you would need to have that recipe or formulation available. Some special things that are included for pickled or dried foods is that there may be some testing that you are required to do and have on file with that formulation of that food. So for acidified foods, which we also call pickled foods, you would need to have a pH test. I'll talk about that a little bit later. For some dried products, not all, but for some dried products, you may need to also have a water activity test on file. And how do you get these tests? So the Alaska State Environmental Health Lab, and I've got a link here. This will go out with the PowerPoints, the slides later on, but you can go to the lab. You can get those tests, both of those tests at the Alaska State Lab. The water activity test, I don't know exactly how much they all cost now. Maybe that may have changed over time, but the pH tests, though, you can actually purchase your own pH meter. It needs to be a digital food pH meter. You can buy one for yourself. A decent one runs around $100. So if you're going to be doing lots of different formulations of different acidified foods, different pickles, different types of sauerkraut, it might not be a bad idea for you to purchase your own pH meter. But also several of the local UAF extension offices have pH meters available for you to borrow if you're going to be using it to create a cottage food. Or if you're just wanting to know in your home what the pH of your food is, you can potentially borrow those. Water activity tests, though, are much more complex in terms of the equipment required, so that is something that you would need to send to the lab. There are very few items that require that. In fact, off the top of my head, the only one that I can think of is pasta, dried pasta that is made with eggs, is one that would need to have a water activity test done to it. Traceability. So part of the whole direct to consumer part is about traceability, having as few steps as possible between the consumer and finding out who it was that produced the food. So you need to process, prepare, package, and sell it only in Alaska. That means that, of course, you can bring produce in from elsewhere. It doesn't need to be, we would like you to be using your own produce or Alaskan produce, because that's, you know, builds the market. But if you're doing something from outside, that is fine, but it needs to be processed here, prepared and packaged. So for example, you can't make something in Washington, DC, like applesauce, and bring it to Alaska to sell it. That's not allowed. You need to do it all within Alaska. You need to sell directly to the consumer. You can't distribute it to grocery stores. You can't give it to restaurants. Restaurants have their own requirements about who they can receive food from, and you can't do it by mail order or on consignment. You need to sell directly to consumer. Now, there are recently some exceptions to that that are being created by online farmers markets. There are a couple of those in the state, and they are getting they're called a variance. They have specific requirements that they need to meet, and they need to apply for a variance from the DEC. And then you will be able to sell cottage foods through those online farmers markets. And then labeling. There's very little labeling requirements. A lot of people are afraid that they need to put their whole recipe, that they need to do nutrition labeling, things like that. You do not. The main thing is you need either your Alaska business license number or name, address, and phone number of the producer of the food. And again, that is for traceability, so that if something goes wrong, they can get back to you and figure out what the problem was. So kitchen requirements. So right now, our kitchen requirements are going to be related to the fact that these are going to definitely be home-based food products. What I often, and when you can cook somewhere other than your kitchen in the future, your home kitchen, there are also certified and inspected kitchens throughout the state that may be underused, that you could piggyback on if you wanted to. A lot of people do actually sort of incubate some of their cottage foods and then move up by starting in like a church kitchen, or some of the local schools in the summer, they may allow people to use their certified kitchen. But if you are preparing in your home, you need to let the consumer know that. And so there is a specific phrase: these products are not subject to state inspection. If it's labeled, then I'm going to check the chat just to make sure. Okay, thank you. If it is labeled, then you need to include this statement on the label, or if it's just at a market, you can have it visible on your table. These products are not subject to state inspection. At the state website for home-based food business, you'll be able to find an example of that, and you can just print it up and use it if you want. So right now, the goal that was created for cottage foods is to keep it for small businesses. Starting to get too large could potentially make more of a likelihood that some of your food would not necessarily be sold direct to consumer, et cetera. So small businesses and sort of incubating food entrepreneurs. And so the original gross receipts that are required by this is they cannot exceed $25,000. That may change in the future. I believe there has been some talk about increasing that. But what that means is, if, for example, you are a farmer and you are selling your produce, it's $25,000 only of the cottage food. So you may have a larger business that is selling other things, but those items that are under the cottage foods exemption may not exceed $25,000 within a calendar year. Oops, it's not moving. Am I frozen? No, there we go. All right, so there are other requirements that aren't under the regulations, the exemption, but you need to be aware of them. So in your particular area and in the state, there is business license requirements, potentially city or local business licensing. You are required to follow whatever your local and state tax regulations are in terms of sales tax and how you remit that to the city. And the municipality of Anchorage, I do want to note, those of you who are either in Anchorage, the municipality of, or are planning to sell at markets in Anchorage, they do have their own separate cottage foods requirements that are very similar to these, but you do need to check those and make sure that you're meeting those, because they do have some slightly different requirements. Sometimes they used to at least require a separate license in Anchorage for that. So you need to be paying attention to that as well. And there's some people who sell in both Anchorage and elsewhere, so you're going to need to look at both of those. All right, so home kitchen best practices. Since we are all hunkering down, cozying into our homes, there are some general good practices. And one of the things that Kimberly said that is really important to remember is none of these are actually new. What the cottage foods requirements and the best practices, whether it's a commercial kitchen or a home kitchen, are all still the same, because those are designed to be preventing and mitigating any issues with any virus. Lots of different microorganisms. So a lot of these are just reminders or clarifying. So general good practices are separating your meats, fish, etc., from anywhere that you're going to be doing your cottage foods, because there will be no meats associated with cottage foods. One thing that I should point out is I'm going to go ahead and put, if it's not there already, I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the specific DEC website that is about home-based food business. And on that, they have a great list of things that qualify for the exemption and things that don't. It's not a comprehensive list. I get calls all the time with sort of nuance and different ideas that people have, but they have a great list there about what qualifies for cottage foods. Other general good practices, super important, don't prepare food when there's illness in the home. It's just like in a commercial kitchen. Don't come to work if you're sick. Anywhere else, don't come to work if you're sick. And hand hygiene. All of those you need to be paying really close attention to. And then something that I always like to remind people about is food surface cleaning. It's actually 2 steps. You need to clean and then sanitize. Just wiping something down may not necessarily do the job. Just wiping something with a disinfectant, actually one may not do the job entirely. And if you're not using the right product, you may actually be putting things on a food surface that you don't want there. So cleaning can be done with lots of different things. There you can use just general cleaning wipes, soaps, detergents, sprays. Follow the manufacturer's directions on whether you need to rinse those or what it is with those particular cleaners. And then sanitizing, there's a couple different things you can do. 3% hydrogen peroxide is a good product. It does need to air dry for a while. And a mild bleach solution, which is what lots of commercial kitchens use. And it does also need to air dry. You don't want to rinse it afterwards, just let it air dry. But sanitizing is different than disinfecting. And so wanting to clarify those, because of course we are talking a lot about disinfecting right now, but what you may be disinfecting with may not be something you want on surfaces that are going to be touched by food. So a couple of the things here: 70% alcohol, a stronger bleach solution, and EPA registered disinfectants. Those would be more for those high touch areas, handles, doorknobs, depending on, I mean, in commercial kitchens, there are other things that they clean with, those types of things that are high touch, knives, etc. But when you're just talking about your home and you're cleaning counters or you're cleaning cutting boards, the sanitizing products are just fine. And I believe, and I didn't put it in here, and I meant to, a lot of people on the sanitizing will actually use vinegar. And in most situations, that is fine for sanitizing, but that is not a disinfectant. So a lot of people will use vinegar, but that's not a disinfectant. So I also have some email or websites for like CDC and things like that. You can go and see what their recommendations are or requirements are for disinfectants, etc. One thing that I think I did not talk about in the beginning is the types of food that will qualify for cottage foods. And so the big thing that we talk about is non-potentially hazardous foods. And what that means is foods that have a high enough pH or a low enough pH, a high enough acidity, or a low enough water activity. Those are foods that will not harbor harmful microorganisms, or when made correctly, they have a very low risk. They're non-potentially hazardous, as compared with potentially hazardous foods, foods that need to be refrigerated for safety. So we can all think of things like fish and meat and dairy products and things like that are all things that need to be refrigerated for safety. So some foods that pretty simply qualify for cottage foods exemption is jams and jellies, things that are made with high acid foods like fruits and berries. Those qualify. Acidified foods, so vegetables that have either been pickled using vinegar or pickled through a fermentation process, those will qualify for a cottage foods exemption if you do a pH test to make sure that they are low enough in pH. Dehydrated foods like vegetables, herbs, teas, things like that will qualify for a cottage foods exemption. Baked goods, as long as they do not require refrigeration for safety. For example, baked goods that have dairy-based fillings and things like that, that you need to refrigerate, those wouldn't qualify for cottage foods, but lots of other baked goods from tortillas to cake. Bread is a big one that a lot of people do under cottage foods exemption. So those are all different types of food that kombucha is one that people ask about a lot. There are some issues that you need to, again, that's potentially an acidified food. So there's lots of different things that qualify under the cottage foods exemption. And it's actually, I always need to give a shout out that I've done some research and been in on some meetings nationwide about cottage foods regulations, and Alaska has one of the best, if not the best. Rah, rah, yay us. A lot of places, for example, yeah, exactly, let's all sparkle. A lot of places won't necessarily include acidified foods. For some reason, people feel frightened of acidified foods, but the science behind acidified foods is something that our DEC looked at in terms of determining them to be a non-potentially hazardous food, not just what some people kind of feel there may be a yuck factor with things that have been fermented, and so they don't want to include them, but there really isn't a yuck factor with those. There's some science behind it, and our DEC looked at that stuff to make sure that they could be qualified for the exemption. So that's my shout out. And then I have some resources. I will add these to the chat box before I leave. I will also, unfortunately, I apologize, I have to leave early and get ready for another Zoom presentation. And so I'm going to go ahead and leave my email in the chat box, because one of the things that, and email is the best way to communicate with me now, even if you have my phone number, because my very wonderful, expensive phone system is at my office. So email me and I will do my best to get back to you quickly with questions regarding cottage foods if you have ideas for it. And then I can kind of let you know whether it's something you need to head on towards the DEC to talk more about a full food-based permit, food business permit, or we can talk about different formulations you're doing, things like that. So I will add that in the chat box as well. And I will see if there are any questions while I'm still around. And thank you so much, everybody, for all 90 people joining us today. It's awesome.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great.
Should I go ahead and unshare now?
Sure. And we're going to get Dina up here and talk a little on-farm food safety next. That was great, Sarah. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Dina, are you in the room, in the house? Oh, there we go. Got to unmute yourself.
I'm here.
Okay, great.
getting set up.
Yes, so take it away, it's all you.
All right, so I'm Dina. I'm the program coordinator for the Environmental Health Lab and the Office of the State Veterinarian in the Department of Environmental Conservation. So I will be talking about on-farm food safety, some basic good practices for produce safety on the farm, as well as some considerations for COVID-19. So a little shameless plug for our program. We're the Alaska Produce Safety Program. We are supported by a federal grant. And this grant allows us, in collaboration with the Cooperative Extension Service, to provide education and outreach to growers on food safety. We also provide Produce Safety Alliance grower trainings around the state. These are unfortunately on hold due to COVID-19, but these are the official FDA-approved curriculum for growers who are covered by the produce safety rule. And at this time, we're offering them to any interested grower. We are also providing on-farm readiness reviews. This is a non-regulatory sort of a mock audit where representatives from our office as well as Cooperative Extension would come onto your farm and just walk through your practices, give you some pointers about things you might be able to do better, but it's not an official inspection. We're not sharing that information with anyone. We're not keeping any records of our visit. Our office also performs inspections of covered farms. We have very few that are actually covered by this regulation, but that is something that our office will do. And at this time, all face-to-face activities are on hold due to COVID, and that does include inspections of covered farms, and this is nationwide. So stay tuned. Hopefully some of these things will resume soon. So the reason we received this federal grant was the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was finalized in 2011. And a part of that is the Produce Safety Rule, which was finalized in 2015. So the whole Food Safety Modernization Act was an overhaul of the whole food safety regulatory system for the first time in quite some time. And the focus of this rule is really on prevention versus response, so we can prevent foodborne illness from happening in the first place. And it is the first ever mandatory federal standard related to produce. We of course have regulations for lots of other foods, meats, dairy, but not for produce until now. So who is actually covered by this regulation? And the answer is that in Alaska, really not very many farms are fully covered. Of course, not being covered doesn't release your liability or personal responsibility to your consumers to be safe. So we hope that all of you are taking food safety seriously, even if you are not covered by the regulation. So this is going to look very similar to the cottage food regulations that Sarah just described. If you sell less than $25,000 worth of produce, you are completely exempt from the rule. You don't have any regulations at all. So same kind of idea. If you're a very small business, we're considering you very low risk. So you're not covered. Then step up from that. If you do sell over $25,000 of produce, but less than $500,000 of food. So this is a little bit tricky. For that higher number, we're talking food. So that can include any human or animal food. So if you sell things like hay or dairy or meat, cottage food, that is all food. So yeah, that's kind of an unexpected thing, I think, for this category. So if you fall into that financial range and you sell the majority of your food to a qualified end user, which is direct to the consumer. So this would be farmers markets, CSA, a farm stand, that sort of thing, or a grocery store that you're selling directly to, or a restaurant within the state of Alaska. I don't think anybody here is selling outside the state. So that would be a qualified end user. So if you sell less than $500,000 of food per year, and the majority goes to a qualified end user, you are qualified exempt. A lot of our farmers do fall into this category, and the requirements are really fairly minimal. This also looks fairly similar to the cottage food requirements. You just need to provide some sort of traceability. So you'll be providing your business name and address at the point of sale. This could be on a label, at a sign, at a farmer's market, or on an invoice. So not really that big a deal for most people. You're probably doing this anyway. And then maintain records of your sales for 3 years just to prove that you fall into this category. We don't need those records. Just keep them for yourself in case somebody asks. And then for farms who fall into the fully covered category are those who sell over $500,000 of food. So again, this includes any human or animal food. And the majority of these sales, or the majority of their sales, are to a distributor. And this is just because traceability gets a little bit more difficult when you're selling to a distributor who might be distributing more widely across the state. Or this isn't really the case for us, but for some of the farms in the lower 48, they might be distributing nationwide. So there's really a much higher risk. So if you do fall into this category, which not many Alaskan farms do, you are subject to inspections, and there are some regulations pertaining to worker health and hygiene, soil amendments, animals on your farm, water quality, and post-harvest sanitation. And this seems like it might be a really onerous kind of thing, but most fully covered farms are in general doing most of this anyway. So they might have to make a few changes to comply with the rule, but in general, their practices are at this level. But again, just because you aren't covered by this rule doesn't mean that you're exempt from selling safe food. Food safety really does start on the farm. You're handling somebody's food the same as a restaurant worker would. So we hope that everyone is still serious about food safety and implementing these good practices on their farm. So for those of you who have taken our grower training class, these practices will look an awful lot like the way our modules in that training are broken down. So the first is worker training, health and hygiene. This is where there's the most overlap with COVID-19 prevention strategies. We know that workers can carry diseases and they can introduce risk to your food. So you need to make sure that anybody on your farm is trained. So this is your workers who are actually working with the produce, but anyone who could be involved in the process. And this might include visitors or volunteers on your farm as well. So train them in how to wash their hands properly, when they should be doing it, for how long. Making sure they understand the signs of illness. This might seem really obvious to you, but a lot of us just power through when we're sick. And when you're working with food, you really need to be more careful. And right now with COVID, of course, we need to be extra careful in general with that. So knowing how to identify those symptoms of illness when they shouldn't be working. And then making sure that they are formally trained in those areas and refreshing as needed. Soil amendments are another area of concern. Most farmers use soil amendments in some capacity. The ones we are specifically interested in are biological soil amendments of animal origin, which is kind of a mouthful. So basically you're putting animal poop on your produce or near your produce. So we need to understand those risks and make sure we're using those soil amendments appropriately. Perhaps not on produce that's meant to be consumed raw if you're using untreated manure, or treating your manure using a scientifically validated method. Another strategy that some people use is extending the time between applying that soil amendment and harvesting their produce so that there's time for some of the harmful pathogens to die off in the process. You also need to make sure you're storing those soil amendments properly in a way that wind won't contaminate your produce, for example. And also training your workers. That's sort of a theme throughout. Make sure you're training your workers how to do all of these things and retraining as necessary. And then also sanitizing tools and equipment. If you're using your same shovel to shovel your manure as you're using to harvest crops, make sure that you're sanitizing it properly in between. Animals and land use. We know that all of you have animals on your farm. You can't prevent them from coming on your farm, unfortunately. But their feces can contaminate crops, and they can contaminate crops. So the rule does require that you do a pre-planting and pre-harvest assessment. So going through your fields, looking for evidence of contamination. This might be actual feces in the fields or evidence that animals have trampled your crops. that sort of thing. And then take measures not to harvest anything that's been contaminated. So, you know, if a moose was chomping on one of your vegetables, you shouldn't harvest that. And if you find poop on something, you know, you shouldn't harvest a head of lettuce with bird poop on it. So really that sort of thing. And if you do find evidence of intrusion, you should be monitoring and taking what measures you can to prevent that from happening again to the extent possible. Of course, you're never going to reduce animal intrusion on your farm. It just won't happen. Water, we know, has been responsible, contaminated water has been responsible for many outbreaks. So this is a way, if you have contaminated water, you can very easily contaminate your entire field very quickly. So it's very important to be using water that's good quality. In order to know what your water quality is, you need to be testing it to make sure that it's good and treating it if necessary, or applying other corrective measures, which could be similar to the soil amendments, extending that time between watering your crops and harvesting them. That's one way if your water isn't the best quality. For harvest that you're using after harvest, for washing your produce, that sort of thing, or hand washing, it does need to be high quality, no E. coli. And for washing produce, you may want to consider adding a sanitizer. This won't necessarily wash off all of the contamination on your produce, but it does prevent cross-contamination. If you're dumping all of your produce into one bucket with water, a small problem on one piece of produce can then become a large problem, contaminating everything. So adding some sanitizer can help with that. You do want to make sure it's an appropriate sanitizer though, and an appropriate concentration. And then the last step is post-harvest handling and sanitation. So getting into that same idea of washing your produce, washing hands, of course, making sure that your surfaces are clean if you are processing, and in general, having good housekeeping. But something I do want to emphasize here, and you're going to hear this so many times today, so Sarah already mentioned it, but cleaning and sanitizing. So they are not the same thing, and you do need to do both. So cleaning is really physically removing dirt, debris, so that the sanitizer is able to effectively sanitize your surface. So one way to think about this is brushing your teeth and using mouthwash. Usually we use mouthwash after we brush our teeth. And that's so you can physically remove that biofilm from your teeth, all those bacteria, and that builds up, and then you use the mouthwash as a sanitizer. So same sort of concept. So those are the basics of good practices. And I think, as we've already heard mentioned today, a lot of these things are also going to be beneficial for COVID, right? The hand washing, yeah, we've been preaching that all along, but now everybody's really taking that seriously. And that cleaning and sanitation, that's all very important. So really, many of you are probably already doing the right thing. So you probably don't need to go crazy changing your practices unless you're not doing the right thing to begin with. So with that, we'll get into the COVID section. So it is important to note that this is purely guidance. We're not going to come on your farm and tell you to do any of this. These are things that we've put together from hearing about what other farms are doing, general guidance from the state, cities, CDC, what people are doing nationally. So that's kind of where we stand on this. It's a little bit weird for me to be talking about protecting people. Normally I talk about protecting produce, but this is really more about the people. COVID isn't known to be foodborne. So in this case, it's not really the produce that's the issue so much as protecting your employees, protecting your customers, and protecting the community by preventing the spread. So there is a lot of guidance available out there. Make sure you're looking at reliable sources when you're getting this guidance, either government organizations, extension offices nationwide. This is one example from the Western Region Center for Enhancing Food Safety. They have some really great fact sheets out there in both English and Spanish. So you don't really need to look that far. And Robbie and Brad have a lot of great resources already on the Farmers Market Association website. So these are just some basic principles that we came up with. First is make a plan. All of you are here today, which tells me that you're interested in making a plan for your farm. So you're already doing the right thing there. And this includes COVID-19 prevention, of course, preventing the spread and making sure everyone around you is safe. But some other things to maybe consider are that your market is potentially going to change. Some of you are selling to restaurants right now that aren't open or maybe operating at reduced capacity. Some of you may not want to be at farmers markets or doing direct sales as much as you used to because you're an at-risk person. So maybe you're looking into grocery stores, for example. So think about what that might look like to you and if there are requirements for those buyers. Some buyers require audits or water testing, those sorts of things. So it's just something to keep in mind. And then also make a plan for if your workers are sick or you're sick. I think farmers often don't consider that. They're just going to power through and do what they have to do. But this is not a situation where you can go to work if you're sick. And for a lot of Alaskan farmers, their farm employees might consist of just them and their spouse. So if both of you end up getting COVID or something else, think about how you might handle that situation. Make sure that you don't have sick workers on your farm. And this is a good practice that you should be implementing anyway. Your workers should be self-monitoring for symptoms. So this might be the classic fever, cough. Maybe you require them to take their temperature every day. This is really up to you, how far you want to go with it. Make sure that they understand symptoms and that they understand why it's important, for example, for them to cover coughs and sneezes and stay home when they're sick. And one recommendation is implementing a sick leave policy, maybe paid sick leave. This might be hard for some of smaller farms to implement. But it will encourage, excuse me, sick workers to stay home. And then implementing social distancing protocols to the extent you have in accordance with state and local mandates and guidance, whatever that is. I know this is a bit of a moving target. It seems to change frequently, but that is important to implement on your farm to the extent that you can. We're hearing, well, I can't do that on my farm during harvest. And that might be true, but you need to do what you can. Another thing that's common here is your workers are just your family and you all live together anyway. So is that really an important thing to do? And so in that situation, maybe that's not so essential for you, but then you really need to be thinking about your plan for what to do if your family is ill. Something you can also do is just try to minimize your face-to-face interactions, whether that's communicating more via text or Zoom to have your meetings, whatever works for you. Minimizing visitors to your farm. Maybe delivery people have a specific area where they drop off deliveries and you don't actually meet them or sign for things. Same with sales, try to minimize those interactions. What some businesses are doing is staggering shifts. You'll have to think about if that sort of model is feasible for your specific situation. In other industries too, for example, our office works with veterinarians quite frequently, and some of them are assigning one vet and one tech to work together so that they're not interacting with everyone in the office. They're kind of paired up. So maybe that's something that you can think about doing with your staff. Hand washing, hand washing, hand washing. You'll hear it a million times today, right? It's viral, as Kimberly said. We're not requiring by any means that you increase your hand wash station. If you're doing a good job of this, just keep doing what you're doing. But do make sure you have those hand wash stations available for your staff. You can use hand sanitizer as kind of a secondary thing, but it does not replace hand washing. Not in terms of the science behind it and not in terms of the produce safety rule either. Hand washing is really absolutely essential. So encouraging your workers to do that as frequently as possible, giving them reminders if they need it, and using hand sanitizer in between, especially if you don't have access to water. You can use gloves. You'll also probably hear about this quite a bit today. I think there's some slides later on about it. Gloves are a great tool, but they're not going to prevent cross-contamination. So if you cough on your hand and then you touch something, that's not any better than, or with gloves, that's not any better than coughing on your hand and touching something. So gloves do need to be maintained in a sanitary manner if you choose to use them. And there's lots of resources for this available. I have a couple here, one that's very instructive and one that's more a fun reminder. This was just from a simple Google search. You can find lots of things online. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. I also found kind of a fun, I can't remember right, I think it's called Wash Your Lyrics, where you can insert a song name and it will create this how to hand wash poster with your lyrics telling you what steps to do. So that was sort of fun. And then cleaning and sanitizing, again, you're going to hear about this repeatedly today. Very, very important. In terms of COVID, you really want to focus on those high-touch surfaces, and this might be different for your particular situation. Usually we say things like light switches, door handles, pens, if you have shared pens, those sorts of things. But then thinking about it in my office, for example, a lot of our light switches are automatic, and in our administrative area, one person turns on the lights when they get in the morning, one person turns them off in the evening. So those aren't really our huge high touch surfaces. So just kind of evaluate what maybe before your season really ramps up and you have employees, go through and think about, what do I touch every day? What do other people touch every day? And focus on those areas. If you are using sanitizers, make sure you're following the label. CDC released some data that they've had a 20% increase in reports of basically illness associated with chemicals. And that's not necessarily the food industry or anything like that, but people are going overboard with some of these things. So make sure you're following the label, you're using appropriate concentrations, and you're using, if you're sanitizing a food contact surface, as Sarah mentioned, make sure you're using something that's food safe at the appropriate concentration. And then if you have the capacity to do this on your farm, maybe have dedicated tools. Like everybody has their own knife and nobody else touches that knife, or they have their own pens, that sort of thing. So you don't have to do quite as much cleaning. And then for all of these things, make sure you train your employees. You may understand COVID and food safety, but probably your employees, they might not. You might have young employees, high school students, employees that don't speak English very well. Make sure that they really do understand the importance of all of these things. Provide training in a language they can understand. You can put up posters like the hand washing posters and retrain as necessary. That might mean that weekly you remind everybody, this is our hand washing protocol, make sure you're doing this. And maybe one way to implement some of these, especially if you're making changes, is to create SOPs or standard operating procedures. And this isn't a requirement even for the rule, but it can be very helpful, especially if you are, say, using sanitizers for the first time and that wasn't a protocol before. It can make sure that everybody's doing it correctly. We put together some resources. This is a very long list, and we don't need to rush to, record them all. And I think that a lot of these will be shared throughout the day. So I just wanted to emphasize the first three because I think those are the ones that'll be a little bit different. So the first one is the Produce Safety Alliance. This is the organization that created the curriculum for our grower training. And they have a lot of great resources on their website, including a list of sanitizers that's sortable by active ingredient, whether it's organic, all of those sorts of things. So it's a great resource for that. And things like creating SOPs, keeping records, so many different aspects to that. Overall, it's just a really great resource for produce safety. The Institute for Food Safety at Cornell University has some food industry resources specific for COVID. They have some great webinars about COVID on farms and ways to handle that situation much more in depth than I went. So I would encourage you to check that out. They have quite a bit on there. Some of it is New York specific, so if they are talking about rules and regulations, just keep that in mind. And the Western Region to Enhance Food Safety also has some great fact sheets in multiple languages. So if you're looking for that sort of thing, it's a great resource to check out. So in summary, I hope that you all are taking food safety seriously and understand that it's important for everyone, regardless of whether they're covered by a regulation. Implement social distancing and hygienic practices on your farm to the extent you can, and this will protect everyone involved. And there are lots of resources and technical assistance available, so don't try to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of help out there. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm Dina, and Sarah Coburn is the supervisor for the Produce Safety Program. She's the assistant state vet. You can email either one of us or check out our website. So I will take any questions.
Thank you so much, Dina. If anybody has questions, just go ahead and throw them into the chat box, and we'll get those answered. We're going to move from this section into specifically the COVID-19 guidance or recommendations from the state. So I think Robbie and Lorinda are going to do this.
Yeah, so this is Robbie, and I do see questions. We will send every single link out to folks as soon as we get our PowerPoint presentations from our speakers, and that should happen over the weekend. So all of those links will be shared, as well as this presentation and the recording. Before we get into farmers market specific stuff, Lorinda was going to go over some temporary food basics first. So let me go ahead and share that, Lorinda. Let's see. Okay. All right. Lorinda, you there?
I am. So we realized that we didn't want to forget some important vendors at our farmers markets, because what would a farmers market be without some hot dogs or tacos or Vietnamese food? There you go, Brad. Shout out to you. So you can see there's a picture from our Tanana Valley Farmers Market. And I mean, you know, prepared food vendors are a really important part of our markets too, because people spend time at the markets. They're a place to socialize, shop for groceries, and also eat some food while you're there. So we just wanted to hit really quick on that. DEC does have a web page, and so does the municipality of Anchorage, to provide you with guidance on how to operate a temporary food service safely. You can see there's a link there that Robbie's scrolling across there at the bottom. I wanted to just remind you, if you are planning on doing getting a temporary permit for the market, I don't know if there's anybody on. Maybe you can just chat into the chat box and let us know if there's any temporary food vendors on. You do need to make sure you're thinking about that right now, because the markets are just around the corner. Don't forget to apply for a permit. We just want to hear from you ahead of time, not just right when the market starts. All right, Rob, you want to move to the next slide. This is just a quick visual checklist that one of our interns developed last summer. It's things that we'll be asking you questions about if you do apply for a temporary permit. Most important thing, I told Robbie we should have done hand washing bingo today, and disinfection bingo would have been really fun. But we're gonna just hit on this again and again, but we're gonna talk about making sure you have hand washing stations, how you're gonna handle ready to eat foods. You know, you want to avoid bare hand contact with ready to eat foods. It's even more important now. There's a lot of ways you can do that, and it's not just gloves. You can see we've got chopsticks on there, tongs, just tissues, a lot of different ways to prevent handling ready to eat food by not using your bare hands. Don't come to work sick. This is true all the time. We want to make sure that you're healthy and that any of your staff working with you healthy. It's important to communicate with them daily. Make sure that you're keeping food safe, that you're keeping food out of what we call the temperature danger zone. That's between 40 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, you want to keep cold foods cold and hot foods hot. and have a thermometer. Like you see, we've got a thermometer in the picture. Make sure you have a thermometer to monitor temperatures at the market. Another important thing is making sure that if you do have cold foods and you're using a cooler, or make sure there's plenty of ice so to keep the foods cold. A lot of times you'll want to have some type of sanitizer at the market. You want to make sure you have test strips to check them to make sure that you're sanitizing properly. Robbie, do you want to go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
And then I just want to let you know that there's some checklists that we have available at our website. I really recommend that if you're just getting started up for the year, you haven't sold any food since last fall, that you review the checklist to make sure you have everything you need before you go to the market. One thing is we see people getting really excited about setting up their booths, and they sometimes forget to get their hand washing station set up. And that should be really one of the first things that you do, is make sure you have hand washing available and it's properly stocked. I really like this visual on the right of a hand washing station. It's really easy to set one up. You can get we have a lot of these in Alaska because so many people live in cabins and go camping, but make sure you have a container and it doesn't have a push button spigot. Have paper towel, soap, and a catch bucket for it, a slop bucket. And one important thing I'm just going to note about with COVID-19, or really anytime, is think about where you're going to dump your slop bucket water. Really, this needs to go into an approved septic system. Talk to your market manager, see if they have any resources for you. 5-gallon buckets can have, you can get a lid for them to put on top so that you can carry them and take them to a safe place to dispose of them. It's not going to be okay just to pour them out onto the ground next to the market. Make sure that those are being disposed of properly. If you're preparing your food on site at the market, make sure that you have, number one, either extra utensils, which usually for most markets, if they're only lasting like 4 to 5 hours, you might not need to be doing dishwashing at the market if you bring plenty of spare utensils. If for whatever reason what you're doing, you can't do that, make sure you have a dishwashing setup on site. And you can see the bottom picture of that. If you have a way like an old coffee urn where you can warm up water so that you can set up a wash, rinse, and sanitize. Make sure you have plenty of water on hand for your hand washing station and also for doing dishwashing. So just wanted to do a quick overview on that. That's kind of some of the common things that people don't understand. Also, just remember that hand washing is the most important thing you can do at the market. Again, it takes about 20 seconds to do it properly. At this point in time, I think your customers are really going to appreciate seeing you doing that, and maybe you can make a big show of it, of washing your hands. But taking the time between customers, a lot of times when you're in food service, you're busy, you're in a hurry and a rush, and hand washing is easy to forget. Try to be really mindful at this point in time, because it's going to protect your customers, but it's also going to protect you. So just that reminder again about hand washing. Takes 20 seconds. And the cool thing is that soap is very effective against both bacteria and viruses like COVID-19. Soap will help you thoroughly wash it off your hands. In fact, the CDC says that hand washing is even better than a hand sanitizer. So make sure that you're thoroughly washing your hands. When you dry them with a paper towel, actually you're removing more bacteria and virus particles too. So let's see, want to move on to the next slide. I guess that's it for temporary food vendors. I just wanted to hit the highlights there real quick. If anybody has any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them, or you can put them into the chat box.
Yeah, so we are going to move in to our best practices and recommendations for farmers markets. And we want to take a moment and acknowledge that there are a variety of different types of markets around the state with different capacities for implementing different things. So we wanted to provide you guys with what other states and other markets have been doing and implementing, just knowing that we want to create the best, safest possibility for markets for managers, for your customers, and for your staff. So we want the public to feel very safe at our farmers markets so that farmers can continue to grow food and build food security around the state. So, and again, these are recommendations. So let's see, Lorinda, we're going to move into the overview of COVID-19 and what's considered essential.
Okay, and I did see there was one question again about the slop buckets in the chat box. So I'll just hit that again. And Brad, I might have you chime in, Brad and Robbie, as farmers market managers, but it really depends on where you are about where you're going to dispose of that slop bucket water. If you're like at the Tanana Valley Farmers Market, there might be a janitorial sink or a toilet that you could pour those into. An RV dump station is another place, taking it home and pouring it into your own wastewater system. If you're, what do you guys have? What can you think of?
For our Homer Farmers Market, my husband actually ran a temporary food booth for a few years, and he would collect his wastewater in the 5-gallon buckets and then put a lid on them, and then he would take them out to the spit, to the, as you mentioned, an RV dump station, and take care of it there. We've also seen folks take it to public restrooms and pour it down the toilet, then sanitize the toilet. Brad, do you have any other recommendations or thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, at the farmers market in Fairbanks, we actually have our own septic system and a outdoor utility sink that has been used for wastewater in the past. So we just try to keep any greasy water out of that one. But yeah, that's probably what we're going to be recommending to our vendors.
It's probably, I'm sorry, yeah, it's probably a really good thing anyways to be talking to your vendors about. More important possibly now, but if you have temporary food vendors at your market, or if you are a temporary food vendor, you should have a plan for what you do with that water. There was another question about, is this just for booths, or is this also for food trucks? So it depends. This is mostly for booths where they're setting up on site on a temporary basis. Most food trucks, if they're permitted by us or the municipality, they have wastewater holding tanks on board, or they're working at a commissary where they're taking that wastewater back. Food trucks should be, they usually are taking them to an RV dump station, or the person is taking it taking it to an RV dump station, or they might have like a pumping, somebody that they hire to come and take their wastewater away from them. So, okay, I think that's all for that. We probably should keep moving on in the essence of time. Let me see here. Just getting back, my slides keep disappearing. So we're just going to do a quick overview about COVID-19, just so it kind of builds on why things are important, right? Like, how does this disease work and how is it spread? So we're going to talk about how it spreads. We're going to talk about social distancing guidelines, and then we're going to have you think about your markets and how you're going to implement practices at the market to protect you and your vendors and your customers. And there's just a couple, we do have COVID-19 guidance on our DEC website. That is it's evolving over time as we get more information and as the mandates change. So just be aware, I think probably in the next couple weeks, in the next week or so, we will probably be updating that guidance. I just want to make clear it's guidance. Again, like Kim said, we're not necessarily going out and writing citations or enforcing it. It is for you. This is things for you to think about to keep your vendors and your customers safe. And also the municipality of Anchorage has some really nice guidance they've developed. I like it. It's very simplified and easy to understand. So I encourage you to look at that if you're operating in the muni. And they have said the same thing, we're just working with people to keep them safe. So just about COVID-19, again, it's spread person to person. Usually people, when they get it, it's considered community acquired. You're not gonna get it from eating food that's been contaminated with the virus. It's through respiratory droplets. Like it could even be, they don't know exactly how the virus works, but it seems that it's spread by people breathing or coughing and sneezing. But a lot of times people aren't showing symptoms and they could be spreading it through the community. So that's why there's a lot of interventions with that. People also could be touching we all do this, right? We touch our faces, we touch our mouth. And then that's how we probably are likely contaminating ourselves, is we're touching a surface that somebody has breathed or coughed on, and then we're putting our hands up to our face or our eyes, and it's getting into our respiratory system. So just being aware that that's how it's spread. Again, it's not spread through food. So the guidance that we're going to talk about is focusing on that for controlling COVID-19. Other foodborne illnesses can be spread by contaminating food. So an ill person touches food, they contaminate it, and then you eat it, and you can get sick. But for COVID-19, it's very different. So let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So generally how people are getting in it is they're living with somebody in their family that's sick. Maybe they cared for somebody that's sick, or like they're working in a hospital or in a medical capacity, and they're being exposed. Being within 6 feet of somebody for COVID-19 for about 10 minutes or longer, or being in direct contact with secretions from a sick person. I love this. This is from the CDC. It's being coughed on, kissing, sharing utensils, etc. That's how it's getting spread from person to person. You know, if you think you've been sick, this is something that also I just want you to be aware of, because you're going to need to talk. Vendors are going to need to be aware of this. Market managers might need to remind people about this. What should you do if you're sick? You know, you want to monitor your health during the 14 days after the last day that, or if you were exposed to a person that was sick, you want to monitor your health for 14 days. You're going to want to watch for fever or cough or shortness of breath, and you shouldn't go to work or go to school. So you really should be doing the self-quarantine if you think you've been exposed. If you get sick, which is the symptoms, the primary symptoms are fever, cough, shortness of breath, and the symptoms could be very mild, you should stay at home during this time. And I know these are a lot of words on here, but guess what we're saying the first thing is that you should do? You should wash your hands. You know, wash your hands frequently. If soap and water aren't available, then you can use a hand sanitizer. And it should be at least 60% alcohol, and you should rub it thoroughly on your hands. Be aware that when people wash their hands, they get in this routine, and a lot of times they miss important parts of their hands. Sometimes they miss their thumbs. They don't focus like on their fingernails or their wrists. So think about it when you're washing your hands. Am I getting all the surfaces on my hands and cleaning them? You should avoid close contact with people who are sick. We should be all practicing social distancing and staying at home as much as possible. You know, really think about, are my activities right now essential? And remember that, again, we believe there's a strong asymptomatic spread of the illness. People aren't necessarily feeling sick when they're spreading it. So it's really important that you keep your distance from people, and especially keep your distance from people that are high risk, like the elderly or people that are immunocompromised. You should cover your face, your mouth and nose with a face cover when you're around others. This is particularly important when you can't do the 6-foot social distancing. So if you think about a money transaction or something at the market, that's probably going to be the case, that you're going to need to wear some type of cloth covering on your face. It's meant to protect others from you. The face masks and the cloth coverings are not necessarily going to protect you from somebody that is sick with COVID-19, but it's meant, you should be thinking like, I could be sick at any time, and I potentially could be making other people sick. They're recommending, you know, not to use the N95 masks because those are really for health workers, but the cloth face coverings are what we should be using. And again, try to keep your distance from people, even if you are wearing a cloth face covering, and thinking 6 feet.
Hey, Lorinda, we have a question specifically for the hand washing station. Is there a temperature that is recommended, or what's the guidance there?
Well, you know what? They've done a lot of studies on hand washing, and temperature really isn't important. The only reason you might want to worry about temperature is that if the water is really cold or really hot, you might not want to wash your hands. But you need running water and soap. And that's all you need. You don't need to worry about having warm water for hand washing. So it makes it a lot easier. I hope that helps.
Thank you. And we'll get in a little more in depth on our hand washing here soon. So now we're going to move into considerations that you as market managers and vendors are going to need to think about and how some of these things might be implemented. So Lorinda's going to go over a good bit of this, what products are considered essential, disinfecting, high touch areas, temporary hand washing stations, space and glove use, and then a little bit more on temporary food vendors.
Okay, one thing we want you to think about as a market manager or a coordinator is that we have guidance on what you might want to consider for products that you have at the market, but you're really going to have to think about these social distancing requirements and how you set up your market. And so we have some considerations for you and recommendations, but you're going to have to think about it for your own market and what your layout is and what you can handle. So that's what you might think about, what types of food you have.
Pat Floyd. Hello?
Was there a question?
Hi, Pat, if you could enter your question into the
This
text
is
box.
Pat Floyd.
She doesn't want you to talk to her.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, we're just going to try. We're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers, but if you have one that's burning, just type it into the chat box or try and remember it.
Okay, so one of the things that we've seen with a lot of the markets across the country and what they're doing is that they're thinking about how they're physically distancing their booths, and like, do they have the capacity to have the same number of booths and vendors with social distancing, because a lot of these markets might have limited space. So you want to think about keeping your booths separated so that you can keep at least your vendors at least 6 feet apart. Like that might mean that maybe you have 10 feet between your booth and the next booth. And we'll show you some pictures of that. You also want to be making sure that you're keeping sick vendors and sick customers at home and that they're not coming to your market. So social distancing here. Robbie, you want to talk about these slides that you found?
Yeah, so these are just some tools we've been collecting from the internet, other state market associations, the CDC, just some cute ways to get the message out. I really like this Alaskanized one with the extra tufts and the salmon. So I think adding a little humor can help kind of create not a scary type atmosphere, but hey, this is serious, but we're all here still to support each other as a community. Oh, Lorinda, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry. Did you want to?
We were excited about the pictures.
Okay, sorry. I'll let you keep going, and then I'll show all the wonderful pictures.
Yeah, Robbie's going to show you some nice slides. Like, so, because it's going to be hard with keeping sick vendors and sick people away from your market. She's going to show you some pictures of ways you can communicate, and maybe using social media and also signs at the market entrance. And then one thing is that we have in our guidance now is to consider just maybe only having food, plant, and flower sales. It depends upon the capacity of your market, what you can do. If you want to have craft vendors, if you want to have your other vendors there, we know that this economically impacts a lot of people. But I think that's a decision you're going to have to make. This is not something that we're telling you you have to do. You need to think about who you can have at the market. You're also going to need to have a plan for disinfecting those high-touch areas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here shortly. No sampling and no demos. You want to decrease the time that people spend at the market. So, recommendations, maybe not have picnic tables where people will linger at your market, not doing the chef demos because people will be standing around and congregating around them. Not having your kids activities. So unfortunately, some of the fun activities and the socializing that we do at the markets, we're going to have to get serious and down to business and get customers in and out as quickly as possible. And then also considering special time for seniors and individuals who might be immunocompromised or have medical conditions. We've seen some of the markets, and also you see that at grocery stores, right? They've set up special times for those people to shop. I know, like at Costco here in Fairbanks, I see they're posting those times at the so that they don't have to worry and they can create more social distancing. All right, Robbie, show us your pictures.
Okay, we've got some pictures, and then what I thought also might be helpful is for folks to think about how their markets are handling this and what, if any, decisions have been made around this. So here's a couple examples of seniors and immune compromised customers. So the Homer Farmers Market, we decided that the first 30 minutes is going to be for seniors and immunocompromised people only. So that's how we're going to deal with that. I see a lot of questions on if markets are going to be allowed to have crafts and other things like that. For our market, we just don't have the capacity to do anything other than produce and some prepared food. So to start out with, we're going to have our booths spaced 10 feet apart to allow for that social distancing and to allow for our customers to feel at ease. You know, that might be different for another market that has access to an entire parking lot. So those are questions that your market and your market organizing team are going to have to ask themselves. So here's an example of some signage from, I believe this is in Seattle. And then another picture of folks staying 6 feet apart. They're dedicated, they're in the rain, they got their face mask on. And then you see a signage board here that has explains what the rules are for their particular market. Here's an example of a vendor with a barrier. You see the rope between him and the customers. He has gloves on, he has a face mask, and so does the customer. Here's another example of a market that has access to blacktop where they can chalk out where to stand and wait for customers to be helped. And then the picture beside it has the top sign, which I think is great. It's a pre-order pickup. So some of our farmers here in Homer are organizing pre-orders, so folks can call and pay over the phone with either PayPal or whatever sort of touchless payment options they might have. And then customers can just come in and quickly grab their order. Their orders can be packed ahead of time. The other sign that I liked, it says the Veggie Box. So a lot of farmers here too are considering sort of more of a CSA type option where they create a $20 Veggie Box and customers can easily come and grab that as well. And again, I just reiterate that all these options are not going to work for every single market and every single vendor. Our intention is to just give you guys some ideas and things to think about. Here's another photo of pre-ordered items. And again, a lot of pre-packaged produce options for vendors have put together. Here's another option that we saw as a way to create some social distancing. This particular vendor put some folding tables in front of their stands so that they could create distance between the customer and themselves. So those are some pictures I see. Are there any, Megan, are there any questions popping up regarding this stuff?
I don't see any questions specific to the booths. There is a question about N95 masks.
Okay.
But I'm not sure exactly.
We're getting there, so I'm gonna move on and pass it back over to Lorinda.
Okay. Oh, one question did come in just now, because I sell other things in my market stall, gathering aprons, bird nest balls. So these are draws to our booth. As long as my focus is my jams and produce and plants, can I sell them? Or are those things going to be restricted?
That's again, as Lorinda said, that's going to be up to your market manager and your market board as to what is deemed essential by your market. Is that correct, Lorinda?
Yeah, we're not trying to be specific about products. We're just making those recommendations and guidance. If you had to make decisions, maybe you should think about, you know, food and produce first, but it really depends on how your market's set up and organized about what you can do. So just, you know, like preventing, you know, this is all focused around, again, social distancing, preventing the crowds and the lines from happening. Okay, we're going to move on to the cleaning and disinfecting. Again, you know, Sarah and Dina both did a great job of hitting on this. We're just going to kind of go on it one more time. You know, you really need to think about, like, at your market. I shop at the market. I go visit Brad occasionally in the summer. But you guys know your markets better than anybody, and I think you need to think of, as a group, like, what are our high-touch surfaces at the market? So as a market as a whole, think about that. And then as a vendor, maybe you can think about that yourselves too. And is there any practices that maybe we haven't thought of that you can put into place for controls on those areas? But again, you're going to want to clean and then disinfect, like we talked about, not just sanitize, but disinfect the high touch surfaces. And I think we've got another slide on that, right, Robbie?
Yes.
Okay, so for, again, cleaning, it's going to be like soap and water or some type of house, maybe you have some type of cleaning, like Clorox wipes or something. I guess something that you can clean with first and then disinfect. So you want to make sure, sometimes these surfaces get really dirty with people's hands. I looked at that EPA disinfectant site for recommendation. You know, we'll quote that a lot to say, well, what's effective against COVID-19? And I will tell you, it's not an easy site to navigate. You can search products on the site, but one of the things that's most available to all of us, possibly, is bleach. I don't know how available it is right now in grocery stores, but that's a common thing that we use in the food industry, is just chlorine bleach. And just to make a solution of bleach, it's going to be about 10,000 parts per million. So it's a lot stronger than what we use as a food contact sanitizer. And so it's about 5 tablespoons of bleach per gallon, or 4 teaspoons per quart, again. And this is from the CDC guidance. And Robbie, do we want to just go back? Can people chat into the, we were just brainstorming, what are some areas you think at your market that are high touch areas? You can just put those into the chat right now. What are some high touch areas? Either at the market or as a vendor.
I can think of a few just to get folks thinking. So at our info booth, we have our SNAP machine, so that's a high touch area. Our porta potty doors or bathrooms, that could be a high touch area. Just taking a look at the chat. Phones, that's a great one. Phones are a high touch area. Vendor tables, payment machines, tongs and other utensils.
Any of you guys provide porta potties at your event site? Like, you know, it might be the handles on those doors when people go in and out of porta potties. Also, like, if you are setting up the hand wash stations, just those spigots and handles, like, of the spigots, and also the sanitizer pumps or soap pumps, you might want to think about having certain frequency that you clean and sanitize those. One other thing is that to keep in mind, if you're using something that has been pre-made by a manufacturer, make sure you read the label. Some of those, like, sanitizing wipes that are effective have to have a long contact time. So it might be, like 5 or 10 minutes of contact time. So we always tell people, please make sure you read the label. Even, you know, the Clorox bleach is going to have a label on it. You know, the sanitizers are going to have a label. make sure you're following those label instructions, because if you don't, you could be actually hurting yourself or hurting your customers. We don't want anybody to get hurt by not using these disinfectants properly.
Yeah, there's a few good comments. Patty from Kenny Lake says the petting zoo is a high touch. That's funny. And also Genevieve had a great point that a lot of our crafts are very high touch. So that's one consideration. And also body products like lotions, that's gonna take a lot of smelling. So those are all high touch. So those are considerations that you want to take when deciding how you prioritize your vendors. Rebecca made a great comment too. She said it wouldn't be a bad idea to make sure there's one person handling cash and a separate person handling food. So while that's not a requirement, I think it's a very good suggestion for a best practice if there's the capacity for that there.
Right. I see the one question about like what to do. Is it different if it's raining? And I guess the concern is that particular products used if it's raining. I think just making sure that you kind of look at it. I don't know anything. I don't live in Southeast or South Central, and I know it rains a lot down there, but making sure that it has that contact time before the rain washes it away. Alcohol is really good for things because it acts pretty quickly, and it's really effective too. So you might consider something like alcohol. Okay, can you believe it? We're gonna do it again. We're gonna talk about hand washing. And we're gonna hit it one more time. There are some really great resources out there on the web for hand washing. Some of these that you can see in this slide are meant for like farms too, because just creating those places where people can wash their hands. They have a lot of farm workers, but also if you think about if you're going to be providing hand washing for your customers, how can you set that up? So some pretty cool ideas there. I wish that if you could see the use your foot unit, we thought that was pretty neat. Somebody has gotten pretty crafty and created one where you can just use your foot to start the water, so you can have a hands-free hand washing. And again, it doesn't take much. Just to have your water container with a spigot that's not push button. Make sure you have your slop bucket, paper towel, soap, and possibly hand sanitizer there. Remember, just if you can wash your hands, that's the best. But if you can't wash your hands, then use hand sanitizer.
Here's a pretty rowdy wash station that we found a picture of. Lorinda, there's a couple questions. Are craft vendors considered essential? And also, if craft vendors are at the market, should they have hand washing station as well?
Kim, I see Kim's on the line still too, but we have said that farmers markets are essential infrastructure. So you're a market just like any of our grocery stores or supermarkets too. And we haven't told people what they can and can't have there. But the biggest consideration again is it's that social distancing. Can you set up your market so that you can keep your booths, that you can control the space? So again, it's not necessarily the type of product. You might look at the Muni. I know they're trying to focus maybe more on agricultural products, but I think that for this conversation, let's focus on social distancing. And how's that sit with you guys? Okay, I think we'll go ahead and move on. There was a question about, so another question was about if you're a craft vendor, you still have to think about this. You're having an interaction with a customer and you're taking money from them. So you need to think about your hands, those high contact, high touch surfaces, and how you're going to protect yourself and your customer. So a lot of these things really apply whether you're a food like a produce vendor or a craft vendor, I don't necessarily see the difference, again, because we know COVID-19 is not spread through food. It's spread from these high-touch surfaces or interactions between people. So I think that you need to think about the same things if you're a craft vendor. You need to protect yourself and protect your customers.
And Lorinda, do you have any suggestions or protocol on how money, so after you collect the money, you're at home, counting it, how is there a best way for cleaning paper money? I know for coin or metal money, you can soak it in that same bleach solution, but as far as paper goes, what would be your suggestion?
Yeah, I don't recommend with money that you do any treatment of it as far as the how you handle cash. I just think that if you handle money, make sure you're handling it in a way to protect the surfaces where you're handling it from. Make sure you're cleaning and sanitizing, maybe the countertop where you're counting it and putting it away. You put it in Ziploc bags, and after you're done, make sure that you're washing your hands thoroughly. Haven't seen any specific guidance on that. I think it's just that practice of realizing that it's like a foamite or a surface that maybe a sick person touched. Make sure you wash your hands after you handle it.
Yeah, and on our AFMA website under COVID-19 resources, there is a link to another market, I believe in Michigan or Minnesota, that has created a little video on how to clean market scripts, so like snap coins, or if you use market coins. So there's more information there. I think our next few slides are just some photographs of how different markets have again been implementing some of these things. So down here on the right, we have a happy young lady who has cleaned her hands thoroughly, it looks like, utilizing one of these makeshift hand washing stations. And then up on the left corner, we have some folks that have created some hula hoop social distancing tools, which are pretty cute. Again, here's Lorinda, do you want to go over this beautiful diagram?
Again, you can see our beautiful hand wash stations and how easy they are to set up. Don't forget to dump your wastewater in an appropriate place. We wanted, again, this is from the CDC guidance on cloth face coverings. Again, you should be wearing those in public settings where it's difficult to maintain social distance. It's to protect people from you. Please be thinking about that, because you might not know if you're sick, because people might have the virus and they don't know it. Make sure they fit snugly on your face. It can be secured with like ties, or ear loops, with elastic. It should be multiple layers of fabric. I've heard quilters cotton is the best, one of the best materials to use, to have 2 layers of it. Make sure you can breathe easily. I will tell you, I think that the cloth face coverings are much more comfortable than some of like the N95 like dust masks that you might wear for like if you're handling sheetrock or you've done drywall and you're trying to protect yourself from dust. If you have the N95 masks, if that's what you have your hands on and you want to use that, it's just being aware that we don't want people to be buying up those resources when our nurses and doctors don't have access to adequate amounts of PPE. And that's really where that campaign is coming from. It won't hurt you to use them. They're safe if you have them, but we're trying to reroute that supply where it's needed most right now. I hope that answers the question. I heard, I'm just gonna be funny, but like I was on a call the other day with food manufacturers, and they're like, make sure you change the your face mask out daily like you would your underwear. I thought that was funny. So, it's just, you should be laundering them. Gloves, okay, lots of stuff around gloves. So the main thing I want you to take away from this is that gloves are really supposed to be used when you're handling ready-to-eat foods. And other than that, you should really think about how you're using gloves, because the problem with these gloves is that people don't, they think they're the magic miracle protective thing, and they aren't necessarily. Gloves are kind of, if you've ever worn them, they're a bit tricky to use, and they can be a source of cross-contamination. And if you cough or sneeze into your hands, or you touch like you're exchanging money with a vendor, and you have gloves on, guess what? You need to take that glove off and wash your hands. So gloves don't replace the need for hand washing. If I had to make a choice of what somebody would do, they should set up a hand washing station. And again, maybe try to take the time to be mindful about washing their hands between customers. We talked to some farmers the other day, and they're trying, like maybe having one person handle money and another person help the customers. But still, you have to think about those customer interactions. You should always wash your hands before you put on new gloves, and don't reuse them. I've seen people do some really funny things with gloves where they'll like take them off and then slip them back on. And they become easily damaged. You can rip them really quickly. So know for COVID-19 that hand washing and then use of the hand sanitizers are the most effective things that you can do. It's really a good idea if you can have, I mean, we have a limited availability right now of hand sanitizers, but if you did have, as that becomes more accessible to us, putting hand sanitizers out for your customers to use too. I hope that helps. Gloves, again, give us a false sense of protection. Temporary food vendors, at this time, you can prepare food at the market if your market manager says that's okay and you have the space for it. But when this is probably something you normally do anyways, but your food needs to be packaged, and make sure you close it up so that you want people to go off site to eat their food, so that they either eat their food in their car or they're taking it home with them. For condiments, these are one of those high touch surfaces. So you want to think about not putting out like ketchup, one bottle of ketchup and one thing of mustard. Try to do portion servings and maybe only provide it at customers' request. Same thing for like straws and napkins. If you want to like wrap your utensils and napkins and then provide those to the customer during the transaction, so that people aren't breathing on these things or touching a bunch of your utensils that you put out for them. I hope that helps. I know it can be a little bit tricky, but again, we want to encourage people not to stay on site at the market and eat food right now. And that, like these things are going to evolve over time. It's our guidance for you right now.
Yeah, I wanted to point out one really excellent suggestion from Rebecca, which we had thought about for our market already, is that have a hand washing and sanitation sort of timer that goes off. So one way we might implement it at the Homer Farmers Market, every 30 minutes, we may walk around with our cowbell that usually opens the market, but that would turn into, hey, stop and wash your hands and wash your surfaces down. So thanks, Rebecca, for that great recommendation.
Sounds like you're going to have a hand washing celebration there in Homer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well that's really great. And just being, making sure you think about when you need to wash your hands, kind of have a plan for you to get to the market, and make sure you're communicating it with your employees too, so that they know what to do. You're going to have to be kind of agile, and it's going to be a dynamic situation and flexible. You just be prepared to change your plan. All right, Robbie, this is your part of it here.
Okay, so again, we just wanted to reiterate all of the different considerations that you're going to need to think about with your market and your booth. So how to handle money. Lorinda did cover some of those things, but we're recommending perhaps if it's a possibility for vendors to implement some prepayment or some online payments. I'll show you a couple of pictures in here of people getting creative. You're going to want to help source supplies for your vendors. So on our AFMA COVID-19 page, we have posted some information about our Alaska distilleries that are now creating hand sanitizer, and we have put our name on the list for some bulk ordering. So hopefully we can get a price cut and help get you guys some hand sanitizer pretty quickly. If you are interested in that, I've put Megan's email down in our chat box, so you can contact Megan. She's keeping a list of all the markets and vendors that are interested. So just send her an email that you're interested and let her know how much you might want. Also on that list is, or a different list, also on the COVID-19 resources, is a spreadsheet of places to locate gloves and masks and things like that. I've had pretty good luck finding gloves just on Amazon. The masks and hand sanitizer have been the difficult part. And I just wanted to point out for the sanitizer, Elaine down in Soldotna had a great suggestion. She said that her local pharmacy is producing hand sanitizer. And I know that's also true here in Homer. So that's another option for you guys to look into. Food handling and temporary food vendors, if you do have those, you're going to need to have special considerations that we've already gone through. You're going to possibly consider adding extra hand washing stations around your market. So if you normally just have one near the restrooms, you might consider putting one in a more central location too, just to keep that on the minds of everybody. We have some checklists to share with you, as well as some signage. And then another consideration, you might want to look into your insurance liability to see what sort of liabilities you might have if the social distancing isn't followed, things like that. And then the other point is farmers markets are super important. We've seen more than a double in direct sales over the last 5 years. So we also want to encourage other ways to purchase local, just to kind of diffuse all of the people that might be coming to the market. CSAs, food hubs, drive-through markets. I know there's a lot of different models for markets around the state. So again, it depends on what's going to fit best for your community. So we have a few slides showing different tools. So on the left-hand side, we have sorry it's so blurry, but we have a little bucket for people to put money in. That's one thing we are going to suggest to our customers, is that they bring exact change. Don't come to the market expecting to break $100 bill. They also, you can barely see that they have information about Venmo and PayPal. Those are two different online payments. Then the middle picture, that's a photo of our SNAP card reader, and they have it covered in plastic, and they change it each time. And then there's also some hand sanitizer right beside it. And then our EBT coordinator here in Homer wanted to implement this one on the right, even not during the time of a COVID pandemic, but just has the card reader outside, and then the two attendants that are standing behind the protected plastic. And you can see the staff is wearing brightly colored vests. So that's another great recommendation. So folks know if there are questions, or if you ask them to kindly mind some social distancing recommendations, then they're gonna know that you mean business, and you know you're part of the market organization. Another resource that we found was a great checklist for vendors. This is from a different state, and we are working on modifying it for Alaska's market. So AFMA and the DC are looking to put together a handbook of all of this information and all of the resources all in one place. That should be coming out the next week. We're still working on it. We needed to get this presentation together first, but this has some great ideas for you to think about. It has a supply list here of things that your vendors might want to bring to the market or that you might want to bring to the market. And then these are some more checklists. So physical layout, signage, payments, and then if you wanted to, as a market manager, you could require this as a safety plan, like Kimberly mentioned earlier. Just having a safety plan in place is a great idea. Here are some more examples of signage, and we're working on more signage to have templates for you guys to have at your markets. Just going over best practices about how shoppers can shop at the market in more efficient and safer ways. Again, wash your hands. We haven't said that enough. Here's some more photos of how different vendors have created social distancing. You see this one on the right has actually marked out where people should be standing. They've measured out 6 feet apart. More signage. Some markets or vendors might want to let customers just let them know what they want to buy. Some markets that might not be possible. So this one is just a display only, and you let the customer or the vendor know exactly what you want, and they bag it up for you. So that's been mandated in some states, not in ours, but it's something to consider. Some vendors might not have that capacity though. Here is an awesome shopping advice created by Edible Magazine, and we are working on a version for Alaska as well. Just kind of, again, just great get in, get out kind of shopping advice. And here's a few more examples of signage. And so, Megan, are there some questions in the box? Oops.
There was a question about the single-use bag ban. So do you want to talk about if bag bans are going to be lifted, if people should bring their reusable bags, or if single use is going to be preferred?
So that is definitely based per city. I can speak real quickly to Homer. Homer has overturned that temporarily during the pandemic to allow single-use plastic bags, and our market is going along with whatever the city of Homer has declared, since we are located in Homer. Lorinda, did you want to speak to the personal use or the reusable bag piece?
Yeah, and if Kim has anything else to add, she can pipe in. But really, if customers want to use their own bags, let them bag it themselves. Like, don't have them pass their bag to you. Just let them hold it and put it in their produce or their what they've shopped for in the bags themselves. And there's guidance out there on how to clean reusable bags. We have some guidance on our webpage about reusable bags. But I think if you go to the grocery stores right now, they would tell you that encourage customer self-bagging when they're using reusable shopping bags. Make sure that you're providing hand sanitizer for them. I really think that there's a recommendation to consider single-use paper or plastic where appropriate. We were talking to Arthur Keys. I think I heard him talking about the use of some paper bags too, because a lot of your customers are concerned about the environment, and so just maybe thinking about alternatives, single use that are not plastic. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and so now's the time. We have about 25 minutes left, so we wanted to ask if you had any more questions, or if you had any great suggestions that your market or your vendors are going to be implementing, and also if there are any other resources that you guys would like from us. So you can either type them in or you can unmute yourself at this point. I think we're free to, we're unmuted.
I'm on the phone, so I don't know if you can see me. This is Charles Bingham and Sika. What about boxes for, we're looking like we're going to be switching to kind of a more of a CSA type format, food hub type deal. And so we were wondering about boxes rather than bags.
Well, my answer to that is, Charles, you need to figure out what works best for you.
Okay, I didn't know if there was any ruling against boxes or anything like that. That's why I was asking.
There's not been any specific ruling against use of boxes or paper or plastic or anything, or using reusable items. I think you need to look at your situation and evaluate it. Is this a source of, cross-contamination with my customer?
And the other deal too, and I sent Robbie a couple of questions on our email, but I'm doing 2 of these Zoom things at the same time. So one of the questions I had was, is there like a master shopping list of all the stuff that we should have, gloves, masks, hand washing stations, etc., so that we can make sure we have that before we start doing our markets, because our market won't start for a little while, and so we can go buy that now.
Yep, so we just shared our checklist a few slides back. We'll be sharing that again.
I'm on phone, so I couldn't see it. So.
Okay, well, you'll get it soon, Charles. We gotcha. We got a checklist coming.
Okay. Yeah, I just, with all the changes this year, wanted to make sure that we have everything to be safe.
Great. And there's some great comments around the reusable bag. Allie utilizes some paper bags, which we do the same thing for the food hub. That's a great, more environmentally friendly way. Joe brought up bio bags, which are compostable. That's another great option. Let's see, if you're on the peninsula area, there's a company called Loopy Lupin, and they have all of these. They have the bags, the bio bags, and the paper bags, and they come in a variety of sizes. So that's where we source ours from.
One thing, I don't know, Brad, if you're going to talk about that a little bit, but some of the markets are switching to like a drive-through model or maybe a drive-up. And would you want to talk about some of the considerations for traffic around that, Brad? Like, because so people, how you might communicate to your customers to keep them safe and you safe.
Yeah, so currently our market's is looking to do a drive-through model with we have a virtual farmers market that we set up for folks to be able to make pre-orders, not requiring it. But just the same as with any other challenge, whatever model you go to, traffic controls and signage, proper signage and distance are really important. There's different markets around the country, like in Tennessee and all sorts of different places are doing drive-through markets. And it seems to be working at some places, a lot of which are a little bit smaller markets than the one we have. But yeah, space limitations really comes down to how you would safely have cars driving past tents.
I know we were talking too, just like if you are going to do something that, make sure you have a traffic plan to make sure that if you want people to stay in their cars, you tell them to stay in their cars. Maybe have staff and volunteers that you've designated to communicate with people coming in with their cars and remind them, stay in your car. Please don't get out of your cars. We'll help you if that's the model you're choosing to do.
And I don't know that that's the model that we're going to stick with, but for right now, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing to stress, that we are providing you guys with the best information that we have for the current situation. And as we all have seen, things change daily, weekly. So just being flexible and having a couple different plans for scenario A, B, and C. We think that that's probably the best way forward. So any other questions or things that your market are implementing?
I have another question. Our markets, and this is maybe kind of a little poll for other markets. If you start out in kind of a reduced fashion, are you sticking that way through the whole summer, or are you guys expanding back closer to your regular market if it looks like things are going to open up a bit? I was just curious how many plan to stay where they are, stay small or this year or next year, go back to where they'd normally be, or how many people are okay, in July we might go bigger again.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Charles. Again, with being flexible, I know our market here in Homer, our board is still discussing exactly what our protocol is going to be, but we have set monthly check-ins, kind of a temperature gauge of like, is this working? Is there ways that we can expand a little bit? I think it's kind of, I would suggest that for other markets to just kind of have a plan and say, I'm going to stick with it for June, and then we're going to reassess at the end of June. And I think your vendors, while it's not going to be 100% happy for everybody, I think they will be a little understanding given this really unprecedented situation that we're dealing with, and we're all doing our best to keep Alaska grown food getting into the hands of the public. And yeah, does anyone else want to address that? Okay. All right. I mean, we still have 15 minutes, so if there's any more questions, I'm going to launch another poll.
Excuse me. I put a chat thing in, and this is Genevieve from Muldoon Market. Our market's always had a pretty standard number of produce vendors and pickled and jam vendors, but our craft and our food vendors have always varied every week. So we'll probably maintain that model if we do have craft vendors and food vendors, because our water situation and our space limitations are pretty tight where we have been in the past. So we're going to have to look at some things, and particularly since we sit next to a playground. So we have some real decisions to make for the year, but whether we have a varying number of vendors is not one. That's kind of always been our operating procedure. So that's the least of our problems. So thank you.
Great points, Genevieve. Thank you.
Yeah, how do your market, I was asking, I think Brad a couple weeks ago, but how do your market numbers vary? What I see with the markets is just sometimes starting out with a lot of plant starts and veg, those types of things, and crafts, and the people that have the ability to grow produce early, and then it really ramps up. I mean, by August, that market's July and August, it's a hop in place for sure. So just thinking about how your crowd numbers are going to go up and down, and the resources you might need to have in place.
Okay, well, I'm going to launch our last poll. So take a moment to fill it out. So the first question, have you learned anything new or that will inform your choices? And then we were also curious if an annual meeting like this would be helpful to you as a manager or a vendor. I think it's something that I think it would be, but that doesn't mean you guys would. So we'll give it a few more minutes or a few more seconds.
I saw there's a question there about produce needing to be sold directly to the customer. produce is, the direct to the customer is a cottage foods limitation. It's not, certainly not a limit for produce. But thanks for asking that question.
Okay, last call for the poll before I close it down. Looks like most people have participated by now. So I'm gonna go ahead and end it and share the results. So that's pretty great. 100% of you guys answered yes, that you learned something. And then almost everyone would like to do this again. So I think we will plan to do this again. And then as far as learning new things, we have a managers listserv with Alaska Farmers Market Association. And I think several of you guys are already on it, but if you are not, please email Megan. Megan, I'm calling you out again. And say, hey, can you add me to this listserv? So I found it really useful tool for sharing resources, for saying, hey, I have this problem, I can't figure out what do you do? So it's a great way for vendors and managers to kind of share ideas, what's worked, what hasn't, so you can totally share your failure stories, just so other people don't have to go through the same thing. So again, it's Megan. Megan, will you just drop your email down in that chat box, and we will send it out again too. So we're happy to add you to that list. Let's see. There's a question, Lorinda. Is vinegar effective for cleaning produce?
I'm going to turn that over to our produce safety expert if she wants to try to take a stab at that. I'm feeling she gets that question quite a bit.
So it might be somewhat effective, but we usually don't tell people, here, sorry, I can turn on my video too. Generally washing produce, it helps a little, but you can't really sanitize produce if it's actually dirty. So it's a tool you can use, but if your produce is contaminated already, it's not the most effective thing, I guess.
And there's produce washes out there, right, Dina, that they can, like if you're a farmer, or would you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, you certainly can wash your produce, and it's something that we encourage you to use some sort of sanitizer if you're washing produce large scale. But that's really more to prevent cross-contamination than it is to actually eliminate the pathogens on the produce itself. So washing isn't really quite as effective as people sometimes want it to be. But that is certainly a tool you can use, and I have heard of lots of people washing with produce. It's just not 100% effective, so be aware of that.
And again, I think that reminder too, don't you agree that, again, this isn't a foodborne pathogen, COVID-19?
Right, so yes, of course, and that would not, as far as I know, maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that vinegar is on that list for COVID, for being effective against COVID. So, but yes, as Lorinda said, COVID isn't foodborne, so that wouldn't really be your focus anyway. Washing your produce to prevent COVID.
We don't recommend any of the disinfectants on the EPA list be consumed. Just,
yes,
it's a really bad idea. So
don't put them on your produce.
Let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and share one more time everyone's contact information. Just in case you need to get in touch with any of the folks that were presenting here. So I have Lorinda, Dina, and Sarah's emails here. Then if you need to get in touch with anyone at AFMA, you can email me at info@alaskafarmersmarket.org. And you can also email Megan for information about getting added to the listserv, or about Sanitizer or any other sort of resources that you're looking for. And then I wanted to put a really quick plug in for the Alaska Farmers Market Association. So we've been working on a USDA grant for the last 3 years, and our funding is quickly running out. So if you like the kind of things that our farmers markets associations are doing, we strongly encourage you to support us. You can also try us out for a year with no fee. But then there's the different levels for markets. The other great thing that we do that we're working on right now is Megan and I are working on getting all of your market listings updated. So we know we can put that information on the website. So we have a central database for all of our markets around the state. So please consider filling that out. If not, Megan will be calling you next week if she hasn't already and hunting you down for that information, just because we want to keep all of our public informed about your market and help drive some customers there. So just as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and we will be posting it over the weekend. We will post it up on our website, and we will also email it out to folks. Brad, now that your camera is fixed, do you want to say anything else on behalf of AFMA or your farmers market?
I just want to thank everybody that came, and that AFMA's here to support the vendors and the market managers in the markets, and do use us as a resource. And if you haven't become a member, you can sign up on our website. If you're not a market or not a market vendor, but you really support markets and you can also become a friend of the Farmers Market Association. And thanks to our partners at DEC for helping us put this together, and to Robbie for all the work she's doing. So, and everybody stay safe, and markets are gonna run, and we're gonna be healthy, happy, safe, and full of nutrient-dense, locally produced food. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Lorinda or Kimberly, I don't know if you guys wanted to say anything to wrap it up. I'll pass it on to you guys.
I was just laughing about the 6-foot zucchini, but maybe we can look to the state fair for some examples for our posters. Kimberly, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this with us, and we're happy to help in any ways that we can. And provide support. If there are any questions, sanitation related or otherwise, please feel free to reach out and email one of us, and we'll get back with you right away as soon as we can. Thank you all so much. Thank you for all the work that you've done. I thought this was a really wonderful, use of time and a wonderful presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Lorinda. I'm gonna sign off now if no one has any other questions, and we'll dismiss class 5 minutes early.
Bye, you guys. So good to see you all.
Bye.